I was just gonna say that, yeah, I was just gonna say that maybe before you start, maybe if you have like a intro or I don't know how to say like just a small overview of when you would use Illustrator versus Photoshop, maybe
Oh
like
yeah,
just as an idea of I know that we're gonna like see more of it, but just as like a little bit of an overview for me to understand as we're walking through each program.
oh yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Okay, so Illustrator is usually for like logos and different things like that for the most part. Logos, layout, signage. It has to do with big graphic elements. And you can do some of that in here. A lot of times with text, you do a lot. I feel like now people do things differently, and you can do a lot of that in Photoshop. But when you think graphics, text, layout, signage, logos, that's sort of the Illustrator, what Illustrators usually use for. And then for Photoshop, it's a lot of times it's like used for, just if you need to have, if you have a still image and you want to make edits on the image, like you can change backgrounds, which we're going to work on. You can work on somebody's complexion and change their complexion. You can add a person to a photo or take a person out of a photo. So it really has more to do with the images. Now you can create graphic things in Photoshop. I'll show you guys like text and different things you can do. But in general, Photoshop creates flattened images like JPEGs, PNGs, and different things like that, while Illustrator creates vector images, which can be stretched
Um,
and shrunk and different things like that. Does that make sense? That's a very
Mm-hmm.
general.
Okay.
yes, it does.
Okay,
Thank you for the good questions. Thank you.
that's a great question. That's a great.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay.
No,
All
yeah.
right.
Thank you. That's it.
Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, anytime y'all have questions, just stop me because I might just go on a roll. Um, okay, so when you open up Photoshop, here's your main page. And as you can see, there's some tutorials you can find on here. Your most recent programs are here as well. Excuse me, your most recent projects you were working on are here. And you can always start with a new file. Um, and we did learn some of this yesterday, but I can go over it for you too about being, it's just simple stuff. But you can create, so there's some recent things that I've worked on, and you see here at the top, there's different options. You're saved, like sometimes you have saved templates, and then they can give you some options. If you're working on a photo, they can give you a default photo size 7 by 5 inches, which is, like a usually 5 by 7 photos, like what you put into a frame. So they have some default things here. They have prints. If you want to do, like I said, if you want to do any kind of layout, and you see here in their templates, they do have business card layout. They have different things like that. So you can do layout in Photoshop. I usually don't do layout in Photoshop, but I have. I actually recently did something. Because sometimes if you want to do text and you want to work on a photo, it's better to go ahead and do it in Photoshop. You can't do those like photo editing things in Illustrator. So if you know you're going to have both, go ahead and go in Photoshop, work on your photo, and then put text on top, and you can have your photo and layout in just one file, if that makes sense. You can do it where you create a photo, and I've done this as well. You do all your editing of your photo in Photoshop, then you take that finished image and bring it into Illustrator as a background, and you lay text on that. You can do that as well, but you can do, if you can see here, there are some templates here that you can do some layout things. Okay, so, and there's art illustration. Again, here's some templates down here. Web, mobile, and film and video. There's a lot of times, and we'll get into Premiere, where I've done things in Photoshop and brought it into my Premiere file. Okay, and we can work on that. That's down the line, but I've done things in here, worked on color or different things like that, but I wanted that to be brought into my Premiere file. If it's a still image or different things like that, I really work a lot, not a lot, but I use Photoshop oftentimes when I'm in Premiere working on a video. So we'll get all into all that. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, I created a folder and we're gonna go through 4 things: editing colors, removing blemishes, replacing background, and adding and duplicating an object or photo. These are very simple things, but these things you'll do a lot in Photoshop. And I'm gonna go ahead and open. Let me open it this way. I'll go ahead and open the options, edit, training, Photoshop. Open the photo, because as I go through, so the first thing we're going to do is look at some of these tools here, and we're also going to look at the menu bar. Now, I just opened up a photo because a lot of times, like, you can use a preset open, but a lot of times what I'll do is open up the photo that I'm going to work on, because it'll already have the dimensions that I want. So if you set your dimensions, you have to do all these different things. But if you bring in the photo in its actual dimensions, which is always my suggestion, you can always change the dimensions versus creating something that might not be the right dimensions and trying to fit your photo into it. Does that make sense? So that's what let's just bring in the photo. And to get your rulers, so a lot of times, and we talked about this a little bit with the Illustrator tutorial yesterday, but it's the same thing. You want to have, for me, it's a preference, but it really helps to have your rulers up here. So anytime you want to add rulers, I think it's pretty much across the board for Adobe programs. You do on a PC, Control R, and on Apple, it's Command R. But that way you can see what you're working with here. This looks like it's in pixels, but that way you can you'll know how large. This is a really large image because it's like 4,000 pixels. But you can see what you're working with, and you can, let me see. I want to say you can change it to inches, but I work on that in a little bit as I show you. Okay. So here you have your image. Here you have your image. Now I'm going to just explain the different parts of the layout. Okay. So what you're going to be using the most now, again, Photoshop. Illustrator was extensive, but Photoshop is probably one of the most extensive. This in Premiere. So there are so many things in this program to learn and to play around with. But again, I'm showing you the basics. Some of your basic things you're always going to be using. Right here, this is a layers panel, okay? Anytime I start a project, I always create a second layer. So I'm holding this with my mouse, and I'm just going to put it right over the plus button. That way you will always have your original image. I think that is a good rule for anything that you do, anything that you work on. First thing you do is duplicate your image, okay? Because when you start messing with things and changing things and scribbling on things and doing this, you can always turn off that layer and then have a layer underneath. Because it's the same size, it's sort of hard to see, but let me make this a little bit bigger, for example. So you always want to have that bottom layer, that original original image, because you'll be messing around with it and then you're like, oh my gosh, I messed up. You can press Control Z, which is edit, undo, edit, undo, edit, undo, Control Z or Command Z on Apple. But you always just want to have your original. Just you're like, you know what? I hate every change that I just made and I want to do it over. So always duplicate your original image. Anybody have any questions so far?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So this is your layers. There's different options down here for your layers. Okay. And this is so good. And something that Adobe, I know it's recent, and Elise and I discussed a little bit yesterday, where you can just hold over, you can hold your mouse over one of these little options at the bottom, and it tells you what it is. So layer mask, and it gives you a little video even and tells you what it is. So there's a lot of things. Okay. So there's a lot of things in here that if you don't know what they are, just take your mouse, hold over them, and it can give you a little video and show you what it's about. And I'm going to go through these things, but you don't, if you have questions, other than what we talk about today, YouTube helps and Adobe Photoshop helps as well. Okay, so let's go through some of these tools here. Okay, so this first tool is a move tool. Okay, it's simple, it's just common sense, but it just moves your image. So sometimes you want to move it out of the way. Okay, and then you can always just go Control or edit, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. Okay, until you can get back to where you were. Okay, so this just moves it, and then Control Z if you want to put it back in the spot. That's really pretty simple. This is a marquee tool. This is used for a lot of different things. Sometimes it's selection. I'm going to go ahead and turn this layer off to show you. But say I wanted to just, like, I don't need all of this image. I can just put my marquee tool around this, do edit, cut, add a new layer, this little plus down here, you add a layer, you do Control V, you turn off all layers, and you just have what you want to work with. There's another thing it does. There's a lot of different things it does, that it does do. If you want to do, say you just want this size of this image and you don't want all of this extra, you can go up to Image, Crop. It'll crop your entire artboard and you can just focus on this image. That's another thing the marquee tool does. Sorry, I got a little message. Okay. So you guys get the idea, and we'll look at that different. There's also there's other things that it does, but basically it's a selection tool. Okay. This tool is a lasso tool. This is a really, really cool tool. It's basically like a marquee tool, except it's a free form marquee tool. Okay, if that makes sense. It's basically like if you just want to circle this and you don't want to square, or you really want to just get in here and just take care of this little area here, you can use a marquee tool. And then when you double click on a tool, then you can get more options for the tool. Let me see. Oh goodness. Okay, so I actually got a close-up of that, which I don't really need that right now. But anyway, it can give you options here. Okay, so for example, oh goodness gracious. Oh, sorry guys, sorry. It's doing all this kind of weird stuff. Okay, we'll get more into that, what it can do later. But basically, that is that tool where it's a free form marquee tool. And then there's also like different lassos. If you see down here, there's a polygonal lasso, magnetic lasso as well. So there's different things. And again, if you want to see what it does, you just scroll over it. This is the magnetic lasso. It sort of basically helps you cut out. If you can see how it's tracing around him, I'm just moving it, but it's sort of sticking to the outside of him. It's a great way to cut somebody out, and we'll get into that later. But you see how it sort of stuck to him without me having to do point by point by point. It's a great tool if you want to. Let me just show you. I'll do it quickly. I'm just basically going on the outside, but the magnetic tool is really helping me. So now, do you see what it did for us? And if I want, I Control X and take him out of there. Okay. So it's an easy selection tool. Any questions so far?
No.
Pretty simple stuff. We'll get into some cool stuff.
Cool.
Yeah. There's a lot you can do with this. Okay. And again, I don't know everything, so I don't want to act like I do, because I really don't. But I do know the basics, and that's really what you'll want to use when you're in here, when you're just getting started. Okay, so this is a crop tool. So you just take it. And it's another way, you know how we drew the marquee around it and cropped it? This is another way to crop it. And then when you're done with any of your actions, there is once this menu goes away, there's a check mark here at the top on your menu bar. You can check it and it crops it for you. Simple enough, right? That's just another way to crop it. You can use that or the marquee tool. This is a frame tool. Let's see what this does.
The frame tool allows you to create placeholder frames, which can later be filled with place images. This convenient tool is perfect for planning compositions, organizing your design elements, or creating mockups. To access the frame tool, press.
So that's pretty cool. I've never used a frame tool, but he's basically saying you can take a section and then you can replace it with something else, which is really cool. I've never used that. The eyedropper tool, say I want to do some text on here and I want it the same color as his hat. It's very simple. The same tool as an Illustrator, and you basically just pull it. And do you see how that color popped up here? If you pull it, the color pops here. I want this light pink.
Color.
Yeah, it just pulls that color.
Number. Yeah.
Simple stuff. And then say I want to use that to write love is in the oops. You never type when somebody's watching. Okay, so then if you notice, and we'll get to our text tool, of course, but it added, anytime you use a text tool, it adds a layer for you. Everything in Photoshop and Illustrator and Premiere and InDesign, everything what Adobe does, which I so appreciate, they do everything in layers. So as long as your brain works in layers and you make that distinction in your mind, everything is in layers. So as soon as I press that text tool, it created another layer. It created another layer for me. Okay. And then you can do whatever. Again, I can make this a graphic poster if I like. And this is new in Photoshop. If you see wherever I move this, it comes up with a little menu bar, which is nice because right, it lets you change it right then, which is really cool because it used to be, which is, it's not bad, but you can also have the menu here if you see. So not only there's two ways. All right, so we'll get to the text tool, but anyway, my whole point, you can make that a graphic element. Okay, so let's keep on moving. So this is really cool, a spot healing brush tool. I'll show you guys a video.
The spot healing brush tool is perfect for removing small imperfections, such as dust spots.
Also delete imperfections. Yeah, I saw that before.
It works by blending the area you want to remove with the surrounding area.
It's so cool. And we're gonna use that later. There's a couple ways. There's one tutorial part of this training that I want to show you guys how to like clean up a face if there's blemishes, and we can use that tool, and there's other ways to use as well. All right, so paintbrush tool is simply that, a paintbrush. Now, anytime that you use a tool here, you have options here, okay? So I clicked on the spot healing tool and it gives me options. So here's your spot healing tool. Now say I wanted to make the size bigger or smaller, if I wanted to make it softer or harder, or this is spacing, not sure exactly what that is. Maybe the spacing in between the pixels. I'm not really sure what that is, to be honest, but you just can play around with different options. So here, for example, if you want, here's my line. So I'm using that color that I pulled out of his hat. Now, say I want to make the size much bigger. You can do that. If you want to make it harder on the edges, you can do that. So it just gives you options. So anytime you choose a tool here, your options are here. You can change the opacity here. You want to make it a little bit lighter. There's so many cool things you can do, but these are your options for whatever tool that you're choosing here. All right. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to add another layer. All right. Actually, I'm going to add another layer too. All right. So Next tool. This was one of my favorites. This is called the clone stamp tool. Okay. This is so cool, y'all. Okay, so again, say I can, here it's a little bit small, but let's make it a little bit bigger. Okay. Now, when you press Alt, this is on a PC. Are you using a PC as well, Bobina?
No, it's an iPad.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes, Apple.
Okay, so I'm not sure what the shortcut is, but I mean, I'm not sure what the option is, but I know it'll tell you, it'll prompt you to do it. But on a PC, it's Alt. And say you want to copy his face, which would be weird. You remember those 90 photos, how you could put somebody's face in the corner, blurred out? Well, you add a different layer, and then look, you can add his face. It's a clone. It literally is a clone stamp.
Oh, that's
We're
cool.
going to use this.
Wow,
Yeah,
never heard that before.
very cool. We're going to use this later when we do one of the tutorials, but say you just wanted them in the corner. Now I did add another layer. You can always add a blank layer by pressing plus, okay? But I did add a layer because I didn't want to affect this layer, so I added a layer. And that way I can move this around separate from the layer of the actual thing that I was working on. Now, if you press Control T or Command T, you can you can change the size of your object. So say I put this in the corner, and then this little menu bar, and then when I'm clicked on a layer, there's some options here for your layer as well. So say I want to change opacity of that and you just want to have them in the corner there, creepily over the shoulder of them, but you can have them in the corner there. So that's what the clone stamp does. It's a really, really cool tool. I use it a lot, especially when I'm trying to take something out of an image and different things like that, but we'll get to that in a moment. All right.
So, question,
Yeah.
did you, when you took the clone stamp, you selected with the clone stamp, like the area that you want to repaint, and then basically like it grabs that and then you start painting it somewhere else?
Yes. Yes.
I'm just making sure that I understood.
Absolutely. Yes. Great question, because yeah, that's exactly what I did. So always create another layer. And yes, wherever you press Alt, now, right now I'm pressing Alt. Right. Oops. Right now I'm pressing Alt, but I have not clicked anywhere on my image. So say I want to click, I just want her shirt. I clicked on her shirt. Now wherever I start is where it's going to start in that area.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
Now that's actually on that layer. I really should have not done it on that layer. I should have, once I clone stamped, always, in my opinion, the best thing to do is always create another layer when you clone stamp. Because if I clone stamp on here,
you still can use that clone with different pictures, like
yeah, with different pictures,
really?
everything.
Wow.
Yes, but you would just
copy
bring your
something, put another photo.
Yep, exactly. You can put them with their family on the beach or whatever. But when you do that, you can put that other photo in this layer panel, and it'll be layer layers. Okay, so you can work on it that way. But duplicate. Just never work on your layer, because now I'm like, oops, I didn't mean to do that. But now it's on my layer. But if I do it this way, oopsie, clone stamp, oh my gosh, clone stamp here, right? Now, if I move this, it's not on my layer, it's separate. And we'll talk about this later, but you can always merge layers, but we'll get into that as well, okay? We'll go deeper into these. I just wanted to give you a quick overview. This is an eraser tool, does what it says, makes sense. If you want options for your eraser, it's here in the top. You can make it smaller. You can make it softer, which can be a really nice thing if you just wanted to make it softer on the edges and just erase something. And sometimes if you erase something in a photo, you don't want really hard edges because that's not what it would really look like if it was in a photo. So it can give you a lot of finesse. This is exactly what it says. It's a this is a really cool tool. This is a gradient tool. So if you click on this, here are your options. Again, all your options are in this menu bar at the top. And the gradient tool is really a cool tool. If you add a layer, you can double click on that, and it gives you some options. But if you wanted to do this, so I just added that gradient on a separate layer, and say I want to change the opacity. You can do some really cool effects that way and change your photo. There are also something here. There's also something here called blending modes. Now, this is a normal blending mode, but there's different things you can do. You can darken it. This is a really cool look. You know, here's normal, here's darken, multiply. So you can go through some of these and see, like, you're trying to give some effect. That's a really pretty look. You can give effect to different photos based on your blending modes. Okay. So it's really cool. There's just so much you can do. You guys have any questions so far? Okay. I know this is like sort of simple stuff, but we'll get to some deeper stuff. All right, so this is a blur tool. This is also a really good tool. When you're editing photos, like I said, sometimes you don't want, if you're putting a person in a scene, it's not to put them in there and cut them out. It's not going to look natural, but sometimes you can blur the edges. Let me zoom in a little bit. Again, here I am on blur. Here are my options. The strength can be 100 in blur. You see how it's blurring at the top of his hat is very slight.
Yeah.
You can just blur it, blur it, blur it, blur it, blur it. You can make the size smaller. Let me see if I can blur this little area. You see how it's getting blurred right between their noses there?
Yeah.
It can really create a lot of finesse when you're working with photos, and we'll get into that. It's a great tool. This tool is, well, there's also options too. Anytime that you see, and we talked about this yesterday, I know, Elise, but for you, Balbina, like anytime you see a little, this is like a little triangle on the edge, there's more options what that tool might have. There's also a sharpening tool. So you can take that same tool and you can, my mouse button is held down. You can like move from each tool. The sharpening tool, let me make it a little bit bigger. It takes the area and say I want to really sharpen up these hairs here. So I'm clicking, 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 clicking. You see how it's becoming a little bit more sharp? It starts to get distorted if you do it too much. I'm clicking, clicking, clicking. You see how it got distorted? But it can help if you use it in a really like a finesse way. It can really create some depth to your photos. All right. And there's also smudge tool. Smudge tool is just what it sounds like. It can smudge. Now I can make it a little bit bigger. You can see more of a, okay. So there's a lot of things, but you can do all this. Sometimes your computer has to catch up. I know it looks creepy, so I'm gonna undo it, but you see the point. All right, so then this is a dodge tool. It's just like photo. Okay, so a lot of things in Photoshop, they take from photo language. Dodge tool, I don't know if you guys have ever actually done real photography where you have to like go and put pieces of paper in chemicals. I took one class in college and you put photos in chemicals. Something called dodge means you actually make things lighter. There's a way to do it in a photo room where you make an area lighter and they use that same language to show you what this would do. So that's dodge. And sometimes you want a part of your photo to be darker. That's called burn. And that's what this does. Like say, if in real life, if you're doing photography, if you want something darker, then you would give it more exposure to light. So that's what this is. It's like trying to mimic what that would be in real life. And this is a great tool. Like say, again, you're putting someone in a photo and everybody is shadowed on this one side of their body, but you put somebody in who is not shadowed. you can just burn a little bit in a very like soft way and then add shadow to somebody's side or different things like that. Okay, this is the pen tool. I'm gonna Control 0 gives you your image back so you can see all your image. Command 0 and on an Apple. So let me delete this, give us a fresh, oopsie, delete this. I'm just dragging it down to the trash can, give us a fresh little palette. Okay, so the pen tool is exactly the same as it is in Illustrator. The pen tool is something you can click, you can make shapes. Oopsie. So it's just really making shapes. I honestly never use a pen tool in Photoshop now because I do all of my pen work in Illustrator. I'm not saying you can't do it in here, but of course you can, but I never, honestly, I never have. So, but you can create any kind of shape that you want. And any options are here. If you wanted a shape, you can do that. And here are your options if you want to fill it, if you want to stroke it, if you want to make a large stroke on the outside. So yes, you can create shapes in here. And if you notice, once I created that shape with the pen tool, it automatically added a layer. So sometimes it automatically adds it for you so you won't be messing with your original layer, which you never should be because you should always have a copy, but just in case. All right, so this is your text tool, and I think I just showed that a little bit. If you click with your mouse, the text tool, just like Illustrator, you'll get some filler text and you can change the text. If, however, and it added an extra layer. So again, you see how I'm always in this panel, you will always be in this panel. This is your main panel. Or you can take the text tool and you can draw a little marquee around it and it fills it with filler text. Now, if you do it this way, Control T gives you transforming abilities and you can make the text, but it's going to stay within that bounding box. Okay, so let me go over that again. So if you click on your text tool and you just click and then you move it, Control T, it makes it bigger and smaller. The thing about Photoshop that is different from Illustrator is you do not have to press Shift to keep the proportion. Okay, I don't know why they did that. I think it's a little bit confusing. If you press Shift in Photoshop with text, it will distort it, which seems counterintuitive. I don't know why they did it that way, but it's opposite for most programs. Usually if you press Shift, it keeps the proportions. In Photoshop, it does not keep the proportions, okay? All right. This is the path selection tool. When you create something with your pen tool, you can select the path. Again, I don't ever create shapes, but if you want to, then you can use this, the path selection tool and direct selection tool. The path selection tool, which I'm pretty sure is gonna move the entire object, yes. And then the direct selection tool would likely, I don't know, I've never used it. Okay, it just moves a point. That's the same thing that we practice in Illustrator, but basically the white arrow only moves the point. The black arrow moves the entire object, okay? And again, you may do a lot of designing and layout in Photoshop. Again, it's not my suggestion, but it does give you some options. So you can do what you can do in Illustrator. I feel like it'll just be more challenging. All right, this is the shape tool, rectangle, ellipse, triangle, polygon, line, custom shape tool. Okay, so custom shape tool, they have different things. There's an animal, looks like either a female lion or something like that. But there's custom shape tools. There are a lot of different plugins that you can download for Photoshop where you can get tons of shapes and different things like that. Okay, so this is a hand tool, just moves your entire artboard. Okay, Control 0, Command 0 should get that artboard right back in the middle. And this is the zoom tool. Okay. All right. So it's pretty simple, right? So your tools are here, your layers are here, your tool options are at the top, and then there's other different menus here, gradients, patterns that give you more options here. And you can set this up any way that you feel comfortable, or any way. There's so many things here. These are different adjustments that you can do. Let's see what this does. Okay. This is adding an adjustment layer. Adjustment layers are also good. It's almost like adding another layer without messing with your original photo. So adjustment, these are presets that you can do. So there's a preset. Here's a preset.
It's like a filter, something like that.
Yes,
On the
exactly.
photo, on top of the photo.
Exactly. It's like a filter. And the thing is the beautiful thing about Photoshop, when you have things in layers, you can turn things off and you can turn them on. And with the adjustment layer, again, it protects your original photo, but you can turn them on and off. Okay. All right. Do you have any questions about the intro?
Nope.